Namaskar, Nilesh in another session of Shraddha and Pradnya. This would be number 46. And what we are going to address is this. Now that there is a well-established timeline, at least for the last 25,000 years or 50,000 years or 75,000 years, easily 100,000 years in the past or so, and sufficient evidence that needs to be connected a little bit more based on sufficient data, but connecting the dots is still required. That I feel very confident it takes us to 150,000 years ago, maybe 220,000 years ago. Just keep in mind that once we cross, say, the 75,000 year timeline, then many of the things that we would like to see the evidence for, we have not necessarily found it. Which is to say, there is a evidence based on the climate, there is a evidence based on rivers, there is a evidence based on Rigvedic descriptions. But then one of the challenge that I see right now is what was the astronomy system, which is to say, there is sufficient evidence that even then the Indian astronomers had a very decent idea of the celestial clock. But the nakshatra system that is mentioned in practically all of our ancient narratives, or I should say most of our ancient narratives, appears to be well-grounded for, say, last 30,000 years, definitely, no doubts about it, but possibly up to 70, 60,000, 70,000 years in the past. But beyond that, definitely, there were some significant changes, especially as it relates to the Yogatara of the current 27, 28 nakshatra cycle. And so what was that system? And where do we find these references? There are indirect references, but there are no direct references. And that's something, for example, Rupa Bhatti ji is working very seriously on. So just to summarize, 70,000 years, definitely more than 25,000 years, more than 50,000 years, up to 75,000 years. We have every reason to feel confident that we have a decent idea what was going on, okay? Granted, as you go back in antiquity, the amount of evidence becomes scant. And so we will know less in comparison to if you come to, say, from 75,000 years, you come to 50,000 years, you will know a lot more. From 50,000 years to 25,000 years towards our time, we'll know a lot more. And of course, after 25,000, like 14,000 years ago, Ramayana, 7,500 years ago, Mahabharata, we know a lot more about it. And that's the point. Like many people ask, they understand this evidence. More and more people, young and old, okay, academic and non-academic, in politics and outside politics, ordinary folks from all walks of life, they are understanding this, okay? Academics from different fields are understanding this evidence, feeling impressed about it. Not everyone, but a good number of people ask a question, and I think the question is very justified. The question is asked in many different ways, but the directional tone of it is something like this. What was there in the rest of the world during Ramayana and Mahabharata times? Now, if you have watched the recent Netflix documentary by Graham Hancock, where he talks about Gobi Kali Tepe or Gun Padang in Indonesia, Gobi Kali Tepe in Turkey, some other ancient structures in Malta. I'm trying to think. Then, of course, the Egyptian pyramids and South America, like Peru and Bolivia, and these structures around the world, including North America. The one structure he discusses is near Cincinnati, and I have been there. It's a snake, and if you look at the angles and try to interpret that using archaeoastronomy, then it points to, again, same time as the Ramayana times. Okay, so people ask, like, what was happening around the world other than the Bharatavarsha? Well, there were people in North America. Okay, and therefore now some people who are stuck in their knowledge, in the sense of their knowledge is like possibly 30, 40, 50 years old. Okay, and they have not updated their hard drive, they will just still get stuck into the ice age and all of this. Well, yeah, there were glaciers here. Okay, but in fact, there is evidence that where Cincinnati is right now, actually that was almost like a border, the end point of the glaciers in 14,000 years ago, the Ramayana times. After that, during the Younger Dryas, actually it increased, and then again suddenly just after Younger Dryas, it was all gone in a very fast, very short duration. But this is about North America. Well, South America, it's a lot of it's been destroyed, and we will talk about why the rest of the world cannot tell its history, while we, the fortunate ones, only among us who truly understand this. And I'm going to give you something why we are fortunate, that we can track our Itihasa going back to not only Mahabharata times 7,500 years ago or Ramayana times 14,000 years ago, but we can literally go in these multiples of 7,000. Okay, so 21,000, and we have documented narrations, okay, from Rigveda, for example, that allow us to go beyond that. And then from Upanishad, from many other ancient Indian narratives, we can track this. So what is happening? I'm going to say there are clues, like Gunung Padang in Indonesia is dated to 22,000 BCE. But what is the challenge? Same thing with the pyramids. Now, the traditional mainstream archaeology dating is what? 5,000 years old. Everything is 5,000, to the traditional archaeology. They don't know even why the hell they say that. But that's because when it started, the early archaeologists, they were brainwashed with the whole world beginning in 4,000 BCE. Okay, a very baseless, laughable, but that time you can give benefit of doubt to whoever was in Europe with their limited knowledge. All they could muster is maybe the world began in 4,000 BC. But that background bias continued. Even it continues to this day. And that bias has seeped into Indian researchers also. Therefore, when the evidence shows which goes beyond, let's say, 3,000 BC or 4,000 or 5,000 BC barrier, yeah, people start stuttering, people start shivering, and so on. And even when wonderful evidence will come up, like Bhimbetaka in central India, going back to millions of years, 30,000, 40,000, 100,000 years, or Pumpuhar ports going back to 20,000 years, Kushasthali, that's on the Pumpuhar on the eastern coast, like Tamil Nadu, western side, Kushasthali, the Dwarka area, going back to 30,000 years. Most of these folks will find a reason, find some excuse not to talk about that antiquity, or will find a way to dismiss that evidence, okay, driven by this brainwashing, okay, of that 4,000 BC. And that's why this question keeps on coming. What was there in the rest of the world? Well, there were monuments like Gunung Padang, dated to 22,000 BCE, Gobekli Tepe dated to 9,000 BCE, the structure near Cincinnati possibly dated to 12,000 BCE, many structures in South America, Mexico, going into deep antiquity. Okay, again, there is a lot of manipulation with the dating there. So everything is dated within the last 2,000 years. That is utter nonsense. I mean, they have like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pyramids, magnificent pyramids. I mean, some of the structures are such that the Egypt looks like puny and trivial. Okay, one has to be there. One has to be in places like Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, not just Mexico City. Like you have to visit like 20, 30 pyramids in Mexico. Or go to Peru or go to Bolivia and actually look at the structure and the magnificence of it. Amazon, there's a lot of Amazon that is not been explored. And in that context, then you visit Cairo and visit the pyramids, and Egypt is magnificent, but my point is, in that comparison, even the Egypt starts appearing puny and trivial. Not many people know that, by the way. Even when these monuments exist, what was happening, we know so little. We know little bit about Egypt because with the Rosetta Stone, the Egyptian language has been deciphered to an extent, but a decent extent. So we do know the names of the kings and so on. Again, those kings you can relate to Ikshwaku dynasty, Ramesses, and so on. Very close names. Mitanni kings, if you look at their names, you will see the connection with the Ikshwaku dynasty. So is the names of Egyptian kings. But then if you come to South America or North America, we have no written records. We have no documented records in a language. Now, Mexico had the records, but the Spaniards just burnt all of them. I mean, that's how dumb these guys were. From a Itihasa perspective, they didn't understand the importance because blinded by a religious bigotry and so on and so forth. So they burnt all these records. Now, some of these folks took notes, and that's all that has survived for us. On the other hand, the story in India is very different. In spite of significant burning, of Takshashila and Nalanda, the story is different because of also the strong oral tradition. So quick summary. This is the summary that I show, and I show it up to 22,000, so 25,000 years. And number of you would have seen the other map, which takes us to 75,000 years in the past until the Toba explosion. And then you would have also seen another map by Rupa Bhattiji taking us to 220,000 years in the past and so on. But if you just take this, because people are right now, I mean, everyone in academia, our Indic researchers, pro-Indic, anti-Indic, doesn't matter. Everyone is having a mental and intellectual diarrhea, when they see these dates, because they cannot go beyond 5,000 BC. They are stuck. 7,000 is like, they think like they climbed Mount Everest. And frankly, let me tell you, some of the evidence that they use, some of those folks use to go as far back as 5,000 BCE or 7,000 BCE and referring to the Rigveda is actually a defective interpretation. It is a defective interpretation. It's a matter of time. I don't get enough time to go into that because I'm doing my original research. But when the time permits, and actually to an extent, I have done it. I have actually contacted these individual researchers to tell them, guys, what you're telling about certain interpretations of Rigveda and taking this therefore to 5,000 BC or 7,000 BC based on some of the work that was done in India, say 100 years ago, 50 years ago, is actually defective. It's defective. It can be decisively falsified. But all you can do is you can suggest. I mean, if these researchers still want to stick to that particular thing, I don't understand what's their motivation. I don't understand what is their attachment, because it can be decisively shown to be false. But we'll come to that. Now, by saying this, am I saying therefore Rigveda doesn't go back to 5,000 and 7,000 years BCE? No, I'm not saying that. In fact, 5,000 BCE, 7,000 BCE is the last final period of Rigveda. I mean, the last additions, based on my understanding, the last additions, the final additions, if any, that were made to Rigveda possibly occurred 5,000 BC, 7,000 BCE. After 5,000 BCE, there were no additions to Rigveda. That's what I am saying. So forget about this. Now, if you ask Rupa Bhattiji, again, she's working through the material and looking at some of the exceptions and what it says. But as a general conclusion, that what she is ending up every time she looks at a new reference from Brahmanas or different Samhitas and whatnot is 22,000, like the number that you see here, about 22,000 years ago, 22,000 BCE. That's what she keeps on hitting every time. Based on the Samhitas, I mean the Rigvedic Samhita, other Veda Samhita, and also Brahmanas. Some of the references, I think they do take us to Mahabharata times, like 7,500 years ago. My point is, most of the, I mean, if you take these couple of exceptions, like I will mention Anil Narayananji, Rupa Bhatti, myself, who else? Now there are, so these are the folks, guys. There are no additional folks. Now, there are some additional folks who will also claim Indian civilization going back to, finally, by the way, finally, thanks to the works of folks like Rupa Bhatti, Nilesh, Anil Narayanan, finally, these guys muster the courage and start claiming something happening 10,000 or 15,000 years ago. But when they claim something, I can tell you, I have looked at their work also, they present zero evidence. Or if they present a pretentious evidence, I have looked at their work and I can tell you that can be decisively falsified. Okay, it's a fakery in a broad daylight. Again, am I saying that the Rigveda doesn't go back to 10,000 and 15,000 years? Well, it absolutely does. It goes back in the way deep antiquity. My point is, just because somebody tells me 10,000, that is not the reason to get excited. You have to always demand, based on what? What evidence, and how did you triangulate, or how did you quadrangulate? Shruti pratyaksham aitiyam anumanam chatushtayam, or smruti pratyaksham aitiyam anumanam chatushtayam. So that's the scenario right now. But the people ask, okay, so if the Indian antiquity is that deep, how come we don't know anything about other parts of the world? As I said, the monuments exist, but why we don't know, I'm going to give you the answer in a minute. Just take, for example, what the difference is. If you go back to Valmiki Ramayana, that is going back 14,000 years, like 12,209 BC, that's the year of Ram Ravan Yuddha. And just before that, when Sugriva sent the parties in the 4 directions. If you look at just those descriptions, Kishkinda Kand, chapter 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, and so on, what I'm showing you on the map, right from the India as the center, going in the east direction, Sugriva is giving the landmarks all the way, starting from India, going in the east direction, all the way to South America. He also mentions indirectly to North America also, but the reference is, what do we say? It's not as explicit as we would like to see, but in case of South America, especially Peru, Ecuador, and Chile area, very, very fascinating. If you look at the Hamon culture, by the way, going back to 14,000, 15,000 years ago, identical to Ramayana times, you have sufficient evidence of a communication and exchange between Japan and Ecuador. Okay, the Hamon culture or Valdia culture, and so on and so forth. In the south direction, Sugriva knows all the way to Antarctica. The Europeans did not know of Antarctica until 300 years ago, 200, 300 years ago. Okay, now you would say, why should they know? Well, I mean, 600, 1500 years ago, the Vikings living from Norway and going to England by boat, which is on this map, I would say from here to here, right here, was like a big feat of imagination. Okay, it was like a revolution. Okay, so consider that is 1500 years ago. And by the way, going back to 14,000 years ago, and in the west direction, this, because India was not this India. India was this very broad area, Uttara Kuru, Uttara Kuru, Uttara Madra, all the way to Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Egypt. That was a well-known area. Even going all the way to the Arctic Sea, okay, Uttara Samudra, that's how it is described in Ramayana, and all the way to Antarctica, and all the way to Peru and Chile. Okay, just imagine that. Now, just to show you the comparison, now compare this 14,000 years ago versus something, say 2,000 or 2,500 years ago. Okay, I don't know if I can remove this. Oh, yeah, I don't have to. This is the map of Herodotus. Okay, so as far as the Europe, actually he's Greek. Okay, so not even European. Europeans, Western Europeans basically consider Greeks and Romans as pagans. They destroyed their temples. I mean, Greek had amazing stuff, and that has been basically flattened to the ground. Okay, I mean, this is well known. This is not some conspiracy theory. It's a well-known thing. Same thing happened with Rome. Okay, but because the Vatican sort of came there, so some things survived, and other things were just there. But look at just going back 2,500 years ago, the understanding of, forget the Europeans, but we will take Herodotus as a representative for the Western Europe and the whole Europe. This is how he understood the world. Please keep that in mind, okay? See, this Austral Sea, that's like a southern sea. The Austral word comes for the south. And therefore, please, 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 stay away from utter stupidity. It doesn't matter who says it. Sometimes our gurus say it, sometimes some important people say it, politicians say it in our Rajya Sabha and whatever, Vidhan Sabha and Loka Sabha. I mean, people have to study. People cannot just open the mouth because they have one, okay? Austral Sea, Southern Sea, from there the name comes eventually when they found the land in the south as Australia. But I was told that some recent gurus in India is talking about Australia as a Astralaya of a Mahabharata. I would tell you, I don't know exactly who was saying that, but it doesn't matter. It's not about the person. It is about the claim. It is about the vritti. And that is extremely foolish and idiotic. Now, mistakes can happen with all of us. The point is, when the mistake is pointed out, do we have, we meaning ourselves, me individually, other Indic researchers, Indic public intellectuals, politicians, gurus, swamis, whoever it is, do they have the humbleness and sincerity to accept these faults? So Australia is not the Astralaya of a Mahabharata or Ramayana. No. Okay, Austral in the sense of south, that's where the word comes here. Erythracia, as you know, the part of Africa like Ethiopia and so on. So that is the Erythraean Sea, that's what they called it. This is Atlantic. And notice, this is their Mediterranean that they knew a decent amount. Okay, that's what we are talking here, Thracians. Okay, this is that Italy, part of Italy, and here is the Greece. Guess what? As they knew about India, okay, they knew about the glory of India, and they were doing business with India and all that, like through these seas and whatnot. But notice how they map India. Okay, all that Herodotus map has. Okay, this is only 2,500 years old. Their map is the only Indus River, and this is all India. They didn't know anything else. Okay, so why is that? Why there? I mean, they would have existed in some form even Mahabharata times or Ramayana times. I have shown that the domestic mouse connected with a established agriculture has been to Mediterranean, has been to, say, this area, right here, see, right here, okay, which would be, in this case, we would look at this as here, okay, so right, or here, sorry, or here. The mouse, domestic mouse, is there in Ramayana times, which means the people from India had taken agriculture there by that time, Natufian culture, which is dated to 12,000 and 15,000 years. People ask, what was there? Guys, there is sufficient evidence, but there is no Itihasa text to tell the story. And that has made all the difference. For example, Herodotus wrote something called the Encyclopedia of a History, or History of the World, whatever the way it is translated. And if you can go to Wikipedia and read. I mean, Cicero called him the historian, and his critics called him a liar, okay? The world famous liar or something of that effect, because they did not believe what he was writing. I have read the book, The History of the World, the English translation. I would encourage you to read it. It's all about, he says this, but that guy says this, but this guy says this, but this guy says this. It doesn't change. Okay, so keep that in mind. That was the status of Europeans knowing about their history 2,500 years ago. And today we are sitting here, and just the amazing thing that our sages and the parampara did is preserve our Itihasa, Ramayana, that's going back to 14,000 years. And I don't want to spend time on this, but if you go back, there's a Mandata, Ikshwaku. Read a latest blog of Rupa Bhatti, who is referring now, connecting the Ikshwaku dynasty. Again, we always had that hunch, we meaning Rupa Bhatti, myself discussing it. She had that hunch, but we didn't know how to connect. But now she has done beautifully, taking us back to 75,000 years, the time of Ikshwaku. That tells us why the Ikshwakus are such a big deal. Okay, why such a big deal? The Rama Vansha. Okay, and now, so what I want to show you is, why is this scenario? Why is rest of the world bankrupt when it comes to knowing their history other than simple monuments? Okay, and those monuments, many of them are only being excavated in the last 50, 100 years. Until then, they were just totally forgotten. Okay, so why is that? And why India has such a rich narrative history? So that is the reason. And why India doesn't have a monuments? I mean, that's another foolishness. Well, India does have monuments. The problem is India is a living civilization, okay? Whereas all other civilizations, with a couple exceptions, Rome, Greek, you can say, and they are not that old civilizations, by the way. We are talking of maximum 4,000 years, max, okay? Egypt, so Gobekli Tepe, yeah, 9,000 BC, but we don't know who those people were. That is not the issue, guys. Varanasi is there forever. Kurukshetra is there forever. Ujjain, Avanti is there forever. Okay, the southern Tamraparni, the Pandyan kingdom, they are there forever. Pumpuar is there for 20,000 plus years. Kushasthal is there for 30,000 plus years. And I say plus because we have evidence going back to 20,000 and 30,000 and agriculture going back to 43,000. But we truly don't know what was there before that. But that's only because we don't have evidence, okay, meaning beyond those 40,000, 30,000 and 20,000 years. But for last 30,000, 20,000 years, we have a continuous civilization. So the monuments are made with the different structure. They are refurbished, modified, and so on. Whereas in other places where the culture was lost, the monument stayed like that or collapsed, and now it is rebuilt to understand what it was. And therefore, we think they had a monuments. We have tons of monuments. But even more precious thing that we have is what I want to quickly share. We know the historical, Itihasic narratives of our deep antiquity because of, there are few things, three things I'm going to mention. One of the three most important things, which no other part of the world has, they may have had it, but they don't have evidence of it today, is a sophisticated language. Sophisticated in what ways? Sophisticated, it is very almost like derived from the first principle, and I don't have a time to go into that today. I will do it some other days, but people have to go to Nirukta or the root word and how the words are formed and why that word might mean like a go, you know, like a cow, for example, and go as a earth and like Gaia and all that you see. Where does that come from? Okay, it's from a literally like based on like people just growing up in a nature, observing nature. From that, the language is built, but then it is built to make it a sophisticated language which has low to no drift. So thousands and thousands of years, the meaning has not changed much. Practically, it has retained the meaning with some modifications. Like in the Kshina dosha, some little modifications, little errors have entered the system, but the signal to noise ratio is sufficiently differentiated or sufficiently high that we can still understand what was happening 7,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, 70,000 years ago, 63,000 years ago, 38,000 years ago, 35,000 years ago, practically in the same language, that is Sanskrit. So yes, it is seeing some changes, but for all practical purposes, a language that is sophisticated, capable of expressing things, and with low to no drift. Phenomenal stuff. Okay, so what does that do? But before I go there, what it does, the other thing, so now you have a ability to express things written orally or write it down and so on. Now, so that's like the place, or that's like the description, like that's like a not place, that's like a what is happening. Okay, and now you think of a where is happening, that is a place, and when is it happening. So where is it happening, when is it happening, and what is happening. So the language allows you to describe what is happening or what was happening. Then the second beautiful thing about India that no other parts of the world has it. Now people will jump and say, oh, Mayan had astronomy. Absolutely, but I will show you the Mayan and Indian connection too. Not a subject for today. But the point is, the Mayan astronomy was decently sophisticated. Then people will jump and say Babylonian and Mesopotamian and Sumerian. Guys, these are out of India migrations. And yes, their astronomy is sophisticated, but not any more sophisticated than Indian astronomy. And frankly, Indian astronomy, there is a sufficient evidence, objective evidence, that Indian astronomy is miles ahead of the Mesopotamian, Babylonian, and Sumerian astronomy, or Egyptian astronomy, or Mayan astronomy. And people would say, so how did that happen if people from India went there? Well, think of it. I just yesterday gave a talk to a group of Indian people here about the Tithi and the changes in the Tithi in America versus India and so on. Think of us, like some of us, even so-called educated people from India came here, but we were educated in some different areas. Now here, if we had no luxury of connecting with India and just build our own calendar based on what we know, the lunar months and the tithi and so on, our calendar will come out inferior in comparison to the very sophisticated, precise and accurate calendar of India. But quickly, so therefore the Mesopotamians and Babylonians are calendars, although very sophisticated. See, why people say sophisticated? Because these are the Europeans who are saying it's sophisticated, because Europeans had a very lousy calendar, no calendar or lousy calendar. But if they would have continued to go further east from Mesopotamia, which eventually they did in the colonial times, and they were flabbergasted by what they saw in India. Again, going and talking about the detail of astronomy is not the subject, but astronomy is time as far as the Indian intellectual mind is concerned, Indian sages are concerned. And they created the astronomy with the help of sun, moon, and all the other astronomy phenomenon, plus the planets, in such a sophisticated way. It's a marvel. Okay, very precise and accurate way of stamping the time. So that helps us, along with the language, to tell us what is happening and when it is happening. Okay, what is happening, when it is happening, even where it is happening, because the language, because you don't see that language anywhere else, but something more. The language will note down certain plants, certain animals, certain vegetation, and that tells you, and especially if you have a timestamp. And now when we, with our modern science and technology, when we explore the antiquity, we see, oh, these plants existed at this time, this kind of weather existed at this time, and this kind of animals existed in this time. And those descriptions are there in Sanskrit, okay, in different texts. And the timing of it can be found out from other type of astronomy descriptions in this. And you can triangulate or quadrangulate with the vegetation, with the place, because of astronomy, the latitudes and longitudes, and it can be done. So you can tell what is happening, when is it happening, and where is it happening. Now, you may have a language, you may have a sophisticated astronomy, but somebody should think of still writing what is happening and where it is happening and when it is happening, okay, in the language of the time, which is astronomy, and in the language of Sanskrit, which is a stable language. So you need a wisdom tradition. You need capable individuals to write this Itihasa. And again, we are lucky on the third count, like third is the charm, whatever, but the third time also we are lucky. We had the likes of Valmiki, we had the likes of Vyasadeva, and many others. I'm just mentioning these two names because of Ramayana and Mahabharata. And so what happened? They wrote Ramayana, they wrote Mahabharata, and many others, although not a specific author, or if it was there, we don't know now because we have lost that. But like likes of Mandata, likes of Agastya, we see these mentions of Mandata, the katha about them, about Agastya everywhere in Rigveda, in Ramayana, Mahabharata. For Agastya, it is true. For Mandata, it is true. For Parshuram, it is true. I mean, not maybe Rigveda, but Ramayana, Mahabharata. And for many sages, it is true. For Vishwamitra and for Vasishtha, a very consistent tradition, this intellectual wisdom tradition. And therefore, I would say, based on Rupa Bhattiji's recent work, going back to 75,000 years. Okay. Now, many people are going to have a mental and intellectual diarrhea, both in the East and the West. But hey, that is if they have to improve their intellectual and mental digestion system. Okay. And they have to catch up very fast. Okay. Boost their digestion system. All right. So what does these three things do? We use the word Desha, Kala, Patra, or time, place, and circumstances. That's exactly what these three things allow you to capture. Okay, so Desha, that is a place, Kala, that is a time, and Patra or circumstances, that is the context. And when you have that, guess what? You have a wonderful documentation of your Sanskriti, wonderful documentation of your civilization. That's all I wanted to say. Again, if you want to at least know about the two aspects out of these big three aspects, like Rigveda, Ramayana, and Mahabharata, if you want to know about Mahabharata and Ramayana, you can start with these books from Subbu Publications, watch my other videos, watch the videos of Rupa Bhattiji, watch and videos of Jivan Rao, read books, blogs, whatever exists from these individual authors, read papers of Anil Narayananji, read Dharampal, There is just so much to read. Read History of Dharma-Shastra by Bharat Ratna P.V. Kane. If you want to know more about or how archaeoastronomy began, read books by Lokmanya Tirak, Articum in the Vedas, Orion, and so on. You want to know the linguistics and a river aspect and a relative chronology of Ayurveda, read books by Shrikanta Lagiri. Okay, so there is so much to do if you are interested. I will stop here. I will see you in another session of Shraddha Pradnya or Dr. No Shorts or my Marathi series Upasana and Abhyas, or another one that I have just recorded, like the Mahabharata Kala Nirnay, and that will be in Marathi also. So I will see you shortly in another session such as that. Namaskar.